Hey friends, once again, welcome to the channel and thank you for stopping by. And just a quick reminder, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you can, share. Greatly appreciate it. Before I get into the thrust of the information in this particular video, I would like to remind everybody that if you're in the need of revolver wads, either pre-lubed or unlubed, I have plenty available at our Etsy store, which is named LameBeaverTradingCompany.com. Now that I have shamefully plugged my product, let me get on to the point of discussion. In making all this black powder, inevitably we're questioning ourselves as to what is the best method. Whether it's pucked and screened, or pucked, allowed to dry, then broken up, and then, like I do, run it through my coffee grinder. Well, one of the things that we have to consider is that when you puck it and screen it, you're not really compacting or compressing the powder as tight as you would, say, like with a 12-ton bottle jack, which is what I've recently been doing. Now, if you haven't reviewed any of the videos up until this point, the way I used to do it is I had this device, a aluminum muffler sleeve, and I turned a block of wood that fit inside, and then taking a cabinet clamp, compressing it as tight as I could. From this perspective, what I would do is take it while the puck was still wet. That's when I would take and screen it. And I would screen it on what I would consider a 3F size screen. And then I would put it on a tray and then let it set out in the sun for a couple hours drying. Obviously, because it's not compacted with a 12-ton bottle jack, the density of that powder is going to change. And let's just get real for a moment. The human body, even in a situation like this, can only exert so much pressure to compress the gunpowder. Now, I'm not here to say that that's a bad way of doing it. It's just a different way of doing it, and you're going to yield different results. And that's kind of like what I want to show right here is the difference in those results as it pertains to weight in grains, not volume. Although all of us that do shoot black powder guns, we all recognize that we actually measure our powder in volume and not in grains. So it's actually the same thing if you recognize that when you're doing this, a 3F GoX 30 grains in your powder measure should weigh pretty darn close to 30 grains on your scale. Now when you get to a 2F, then that's when your weights start changing, or a 4F, or a 4F. That's when your weights are going to start changing. So, off camera, I had already measured out my 30 grains of 3F GoX. I put it on my digital scale instead of my RSCBS scale and got exactly 30 grains. So obviously what I'm going to do now is start with the powder as I have made it. Some of it I pucked and screened while it was still wet. I believe that is going to be either the Cottonwood or the Choya, because at some point in doing all of that, I mentioned in a previous video, I exerted maybe a little bit too much pressure in the back end of my vise. It went flying off on the bench, so I had to weld that back up, and that's when I decided to make that press with that 12-ton jack. And some of this, the corned willow, the juniper, and the barberry, I actually went back through and and pucked all of that with the 12-ton bottle jack. So there's going to be a difference because we're actually compressing and compacting the black powder tighter. So we would expect different results, wouldn't we? So with that being stated, let me measure out 30 grains of the homemade Willow that was made into a puck and screened while it was still wet. And this was, once again, only compressed by using this device with the cabinet clamp. So let me get out 30 grains here, and we'll put it on the scale and see what it does. I'm going to kind of settle it because that's what I did with the factory GoX. I settled it. Okay. Turn on the scale. Put the tray on it. Zero it out. And dump the powder. And what I have is 13 grains. That's pretty light powder by anybody's standard. So I'm going to write that down so that I can kind of track how this is going to go. Okay, so that's 13 grains of what I would consider screened to the size of 3F. And once again, this is Willow, pucked and then screened while it was wet and left outside to dry. The next one is going to be the corned Willow. In this particular batch, I know was pucked with that 12-ton bottle jack. So I would expect a much denser powder, and I would expect it to weigh a little bit more. Well, there it is. 24 grains. Almost twice as heavy. And that would actually get us somewhat closer to the 30 grains of 3F GoX. Okay, next we're going to do the Cottonwood. Now the Cottonwood was pucked in my vise before the vise broke. So let me get this in the measuring container, the measuring flask. Spill it all over the floor. Whoops, we'll call that good. Zero it out. Pour the powder, and we are at 14 grains. That's actually pretty light, isn't it? That would be right in line with the Willow that was pucked and then screened while wet. And bear in mind, I also recognize, as I stated, this was pucked in my vise. Actually, I should go back and watch the video on the Cottonwood because I may not have done it. I guess at this point I should be honest and say I really don't remember how I did this one. But anyhow, I would almost venture a bet, or venture a guess, that this was pucked and screened while it was still wet and left outside to dry. But that's neither here nor there because in the end I really want to see which of these powders is going to be much more cleaner burning. So enjoy the laugh and enjoy the screw up or the loss of memory. Okay, next I'm going to do the homemade Juniper. Now I do know that this was pucked underneath that 12-ton bottle jack. Because what I actually did in a previous video, I did a burn test with this powder, and I had known at that point in time that this black powder made with Juniper was actually pucked and then screened while it was wet. So what I did is I took what I had in this container, put it back in my ball mill, got it back down to the fine powder, and I pucked it and compressed it with that bottle jack. So this right here, I know, has been compressed with that 12-ton jack. All right, here we go. Juniper. 24 grains. So that's a whole lot closer to the factory GoX 3F, isn't it? Next will be the barberry. I'm trying to do it like this so that I don't spill my powder on the floor. Fortunately, I don't smoke. Okay, this is the barberry. That also is, well, actually that's 27 grains. So that's even closer to the 3F. And bear in mind, my homemade stuff does not have that coating of graphite on it, which the 3F factory does. And I'm scaling this out at 27 grains. So just kind of speaking off the cuff right now, if I were to make any more gunpowder and have it come close to the factory weight and volume wise, I'm going to pretty much stick with the barberry. Now bear in mind, I also said before I charred it in the previous video that barberry is diffuse porous, so there isn't any pores in it, so it really mimics a maple even though it's not. Okay, now the final one, cholla, which was the cactus. And I do know, like the barberry, the cholla was also compressed underneath that 12-ton jack. That'll work. $17 grains. Okay, well, with that being said and done, I guess the next step would be to really get out and shoot this through my flintlock and see by comparison which one of these burns the cleanest. As far as the weight, as it closely matches the 3F in 30 grains of the GoX, it looks like Juniper and barberry are going to be perhaps the two powders of choice. There again, once I shoot it and clean out the barrel, we'll see which one actually burns the cleanest. So anyhow, thanks for watching. I hope that somebody can glean something from this that might be of value, have a good takeaway. But just to reiterate what my findings were. Once again, using GoX as the baseline, I measured out 30 grains, and then I poured it into my measurer, leveled it off, well, settled it, and then leveled it off, and put it on my scale, and I got 30 grains. So the next powder that we tested was the Willow that was pucked and grained while it was still wet. But there again, this particular batch was not pucked with that 12-ton jack. And as we tested the next Willow, it was pucked with the 12-ton jack, and we ended up with 24 grains in my measuring device. So obviously when it comes to the Willow, you're going to yield a much denser gunpowder by using something like I have now, that 12-ton jack. So that really does make a difference in the weight of your gunpowder, whether it's just wetted and screened or put underneath a bottle jack, something that's got some pressure to, you know, condense that powder, allowed to dry, and then broken up and run through my coffee grinder. Next we had the Cottonwood, which, you know, like I said, I know, or I don't remember for sure, but I'm kind of thinking I just wet this and screened it that way. But here again, as far as I'm concerned, if it burns really, really clean, then I'll go back and puck it and put it in my 12-ton jack, compress it, and then, you know, reweigh it at that point if it burns clean. I don't know how it's going to burn. Then we had the Juniper, which was compressed with my 12-ton jack, and that weighed 24 grains in a 30-grain powder measurer. So that's pretty comparable. And then the Choya, then the Barberry, came in at 27 grains, which actually is a whole lot closer to the factory GoX 3F. So I have high hopes for this. Once again, once I, you know, shoot it in my flintlock, run a few patches through, we'll see just how dirty it actually is. And then last was the Choya. That came in at 17 grains. So I was really disappointed in this personally. I really thought that this would have weighed a lot more than it actually did. Also along with the Cottonwood, I would have thought that it would have weighed more. But anyhow, thanks for listening to my ramblings, and hopefully if I can get a day within this next week when it's not so windy, I can get out and start recording the shooting of these gunpowders so we can kind of see at that point which one is actually a cleaner burning gunpowder. So thanks for watching, friends, and you all have a wonderful weekend. So long.